Hi guys, it's Samantha and I am here today with a kind of a discussion, storytelling video, if you will. I want to do my reading history. I'm sure you guys have seen these videos going around Booktube for a few weeks now. We've kind of started it, and then Susie Reed's done one, and Karina, and just a whole bunch of really cool booktubers, and I kind of wanted to join in and tell you guys my reading history. So for as long as I can remember, books and reading have always been a large part of my history, and they've always been a big part of my family. My mom and my dad love to read, and my sisters love to read, and so I've always been surrounded by this love of reading and books. And growing up, our dad would always read us a story, and we had tons of really cool old books to choose from, kids books like Pickle Things and Snowy Day and Bullfrog Builds His House, and Little Cloud was another favorite, and he would always give Little Cloud and Meme out in their own voices, which just sticks out in my head, so I always thought that was really cool. And there was just all these really old cool books that we had that we could choose, and he would read one to us every night. And I remember our mom would also read to us. We had this fairy tale book I remember her reading from, and so I just always grew up around reading, and our parents loved to read, and they tried to really impart that into us. And even before I started grade school, my parents had started to teach me to read, you know, some words and stuff. So by the time I went to school, I kind of already had a little bit of a background in reading. Reading was even a part of our Christmas traditions in our family, because every single Christmas Eve we would read a Christmas carol, and we would all have to take turns reading a certain chapter from a Christmas carol. And even so basically as soon as we were old enough to read, our parents would have us help read the Christmas carol, and then when the book was finished, we would all go to bed that night. And so even reading and literature was part of our Christmas traditions. When I got to grade school, reading always came easy to me, so I was always in the more advanced reading groups. Like, I remember in grade school there's usually like 3 different pools, third being the most advanced, and I was usually in that one. Until about 2nd or 3rd grade, I think it was 2nd grade, where I had sort of started to exceed that 3rd reading group. Our school actually had this program called Junior Great Books, where they would kind of test your reading level, and if you tested above what they are providing for you in your class, during that reading time you would leave and join other kids from other classes who were also advanced readers, and you would read even more advanced books and things. And so we would read these stories, and you would answer questions. I think we even did a play once. I think we did Jack and the Beanstalk. And so I was in that for a couple of years. The thing is, though, at this time, I really wasn't enjoying reading. I was surrounded by people who loved reading and loved books, but I myself just didn't like it. I wasn't into it. I thought it was still kind of boring, even though there was all of these incentives. Another thing I remember they did in grade school was, if you read for 15 minutes and your parents signed off on it, and then you filled a whole sheet up, I think it was like 2.5 hours worth, then you could like turn it in for a free pizza from Domino's. So I remember doing that because I wanted the pizza, but I still didn't really much care for reading. I just hadn't gotten to the point yet where I enjoyed it and found it exciting. And then came 4th grade. I don't know how it happened, but for some reason I had checked out The Big Friendly Giant, the BFG by Roald Dahl. I'm not sure if my sister suggested it to me or if I just saw it or what, but I ended up checking out the book, and I absolutely adored it. I started reading it that night and I could not put it down. I think I read it in like a day, pretty much, and I was just so engrossed in the world that Roald Dahl had created, and I was so caught up in the story, and I had to see what was going to turn out. And I finally understood it, finally clicked why my parents and my sisters really loved reading. I finally understood, and from that point forward I could not get enough of it. I had to read more. I had to get more books and explore what I liked and get lost in more stories. It was about the same time that I also started to be homeschooled. And so at this point my parents were setting my curriculum, and they made a part of the curriculum that I had to read a book. And she would split out, my mom would split out a certain amount of chapters that I'd have to read each day of the book that they chose. So it was through this that I was introduced to a lot of really good pieces of literature and books that I probably wouldn't have otherwise encountered, such as Where the Red Fern Grows and White Fang and The Giver. Anne of Green Gables, that's when I read all the Anne of Green Gables books, and just tons and tons of really good books. Among those was in 6th grade, my mom and dad had me read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. My dad loved these books and had my middle sister read them, my mom read them, and then they decided it was time for me to read them. And that, I think, was definitely a turning point in my reading history, because I absolutely fell in love with and adored these books so much. I mean, I was obsessed with them. I could not get enough of them. I remember I even tried to make them into a play that I was going to act out with my sisters, and I had even made some props, like I made Sting the sword and stuff, but then I realized that that undertaking was going to be quite huge, and I ended up abandoning it. But even after I read them for my school, I remember I reread them so many times after that. And then a few months later, I was in our library resale room, and I found the entire trilogy for 25 cents each, and I immediately got it. I was so excited. It was one of the first books I bought for myself with my own allowance money, and I was so excited because I finally owned these books that I love so much. And I still have them. You've seen them in the videos. They're these 70s editions of The Lord of the Rings, and I will always keep them even though the covers aren't the best and this one's horribly beat up. I will always keep them because they mean so much to me, because these were 3 of the books that I bought for myself for the first time. I have just been joined by somebody who wants to help me talk about my reading history, so you can help, boo? So it was really The Lord of the Rings that got me into fantasy and really set me on that course of trying to find any fantasy book I could. I became obsessed with it. It is still my favorite genre. I just love fantasy and losing myself in other worlds and places, and it's just amazing. And Tolkien started that for me, and my parents started that for me because they had me read it. It was about the same time that Harry Potter also started to came to the United States. The first 3 books were out, but I was so against reading them because people kept saying they were just as good as The Lord of the Rings, and I was so obsessed with The Lord of the Rings that nothing could be as good as The Lord of the Rings. But my sister got my mom the first 3 books for Christmas, and a couple months later I was in between books, and so my mom just handed me the first book and she's like, you know, you need to read it, you're gonna like it. And so I grabbed it, and I did. I absolutely fell in love with Harry Potter. I think I read that first book in about a day and a half, and it was amazing, and I became obsessed with Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings both. A couple months later, I ended up getting the first 3 books for my very own, for my birthday, and after that, every single time a new Harry Potter book was released, I got it, and it still remains a large part of my literary history because it played a very big role in my childhood, Harry Potter. My freshman year of high school, I did actually have at my local high school, and I met this girl there, Whitney, and we just sort of connected because she loved to read as much as I did, and it was actually Whitney that introduced me to the wonderful Tamora Pierce, who remains one of my favorite authors. Whitney loved to read, and she had tons of books, and she actually kind of ran a little bit of a library to her friends, so she would have like a list of who was lending out what book, how long they had had it, what condition she lent it out in, what condition she got it back in, and she ended up lending me all of Tamora Pierce's books, and I absolutely fell in love with Tamora Pierce. I don't know how many times I have read those books. It's been a few years, so I need to do it again, so it's been like 5-6 years since I reread them. I remember being totally captured with Tamora Pierce's female heroines and her fantasy worlds. They're just so magnificently plotted out and told, and oh yes, definitely a very big moment in my reading history being introduced to Tamora Pierce, because it made me seek out more female fantasy authors, particularly ones that wrote about female protagonists, because I liked seeing another female do things that I thought were so cool, like Tamora Pierce's first quartet, Alana. She's a female that ends up going to train as a knight, and I thought that was awesome, and I was very captured with that. It was also the same year that I met somebody else, Marie, who we ended up talking about The Squire's Tale book by Gerald Morris, and that was when I started really enjoying Arthurian legends and Arthurian retellings. So after that point, after I read those Squire's Tales books, which I think I realized I still need to read 3 more. 3 more have been released that I haven't read. I picked up The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron and In Camelot's Shadow, those books by Sarah Zettel, and I just loved Arthurian legend retellings. After my freshman year of high school, I ended up being homeschooled again, and it was during this time period that I really started to get into classics. My parents had me reading even more classics. So I started reading more Charles Dickens. I read A Tale of Two Cities. I read Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, which was my mom's favorite book, and it's an excellent book, and I loved it. That's when I first read Jane Austen. I read Pride and Prejudice and Emma, and that's when I realized that classical literature is just as good as fantasy literature, and I would try to seek out more books on my own. When I started college, I started reading That's when I first read Jane Eyre and absolutely fell in love with Jane Eyre. But when I actually got to college itself, I was actually a business major, so I didn't have very many opportunities to take literature classes. I think I took one, which was a women's studies class, and Native American lit class, so I took two. And in both of those, we read books outside of normal genres that I would not have read before, such as Native American lit. We read books by Native American authors such as Sherman Alexie and Louise Erdrich and a bunch of other really awesome authors. And in the women's studies class, we read literature put out by females, journals from various walks of life. So some of them are actually journals from indentured servants from the early American history and just things like that. They're both interesting classes I was able to take despite the fact that I was a business major that I found interesting. And so basically from there on out, I just sort of really always sought out my own more books in the genres I like. I've really started to read more classics and more fantasy, and I'm always seeking out more and more fantasy. I mean, ever since I fell in love with Lord of the Rings, I was constantly searching for more fantasy books. It actually has gotten to the point where I have a hard time not reading. I feel almost a little bit lost when I'm not reading a book. I'd like to be able to go to some place where I can just escape and immerse myself in a whole other world. And I find that so amazing and one of the most beautiful things about books themselves. So of course this leads me up to where I am now. I discovered BookTube about Christmas of last year, and it was in May that I decided to make my own channel. I found this wonderful community, a group of people that loved books just as much as I do and love to talk about them, and to be able to share that experience with others via YouTube I thought was awesome. And I finally got brave enough in May and I created my channel, and I am so glad I have, because I have met so many awesome people and been able to discover so many new books I had never heard of before that I now love. The Lives of Locke Lamora being one of them. I first saw somebody talk about on BookTube, so it's just been a really, really great experience, and I am happy I joined and am doing this. So guys, that is my personal reading history. I hope you liked this video and found it interesting. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what some major moments were in your reading history. Until next time guys, happy reading and bye! Hi guys, it's Samantha, and I am back today with some very exciting news for you all. I have decided to create and head up a very Dickens Christmas read-along, because I love Christmas and I love Charles Dickens, and he has tons of Christmas stories,